test cases, okay, the process to even argue it is probably over 60 days to get the resolution.
Right.
You gotta remember, it's not just the pay, it's health care, it's seniority for pension.
Unemployment would just be, you know.
I'm not trying to paint a picture with a broad brush here, because there are cases where individuals that come back to work, they may have some type of policy in their plant, in their facilities to say, I come back, you know, we'll credit you this, it's not an issue, take your time, what you need, and so on and so forth. But there are issues in this country where we don't have that. That case I gave you with our member in Waterbury, Connecticut, may be an extreme case, but it's an actual case. 2 weeks. 2 weeks from being in a combat zone to standing in your living room. It's unimaginable to me.
Good. Can I, Mike? I like to put the age on.
Save your comments for the end.
Good luck with that one.
I want to put the 800-pound gorilla in the middle of the room and start the dialogue. In prep for this dialogue, I spoke to several very large employers relative to this topic of a separate discipline tree consideration for military service relative to attendance, and some were receptive, but some raised an issue, and I'd be interested in input from the audience, because we have some distinguished attorneys who represent both sides of the aisle. They've said, well, and Assemblywoman Hunter raised the issue. We employers, we have to be very careful, Jim, because we can't show partiality or give special consideration to veterans relative to an attendance policy that's well established, because the non-veteran who violates the attendance rule, and it's non-discretionary discipline, can say that you're treating me in a different way than the vet.
And the union might have an obligation, so let's say.
And there's a duty of, as you know, there's a duty of fair representation, as you know, with the union, that a member can say to the union, wait a minute, Jim Valente, you got Joe Smo, the combat veteran, back, and he missed 12 days, and on 10 days he's supposed to be discharged. You got him back because of consideration, he's a combat vet, and you didn't consider me, I was going through a divorce or I had a sick child. So I'd like to kick that off. Is there a problem with this approach in terms of a DFR or a disparate treatment handling with the employers on veterans issues? Because I'm getting this signal. We'd love to do it, Jim, but we're afraid that we're going to be charged with discriminating against the divorce person going through a divorce or with a sick child over a combat veteran. Any from the panel or anybody have any ideas relative to that?
So the way that I see this is you're looking at not just that they're a combat veteran, but maybe some disability behind it. So what is going on because they have maybe anxiety or post-traumatic stress or a traumatic brain injury? That is a mitigating factor, not just the combat veteran status. But also, when you have this type of treatment, you then open the eyes of the employer to see, well, there's, the mental health will maybe affect more than just combat veterans, and this will help all employees. So this is what I'm hoping this does, is this will open one door to help more people than just veterans.
Right, so perhaps the distinction to the extent, we want to push one, shouldn't be drawn neatly down the line of combat vet, right? I mean, to the extent these problems that we're describing with respect to attendance or perhaps some anger and violence, perhaps fighting on the shop floor, whatever the case may be, and what's the root cause of that? As Yelena pointed out, it's depends on the case, but in many cases I would suspect it has to do stress, some mental illness, some health issues. So, you know, if you categorize it like that, then you're less likely to draw these arbitrary distinctions between employees, like you said, maybe someone's going through a divorce or they had some other legitimate personal issue that resulted in this you know, bad behavior, quote unquote. So, you know, maybe that's where the line ought to be drawn, and that will hopefully capture our vets that are having these issues, and it'll also capture more folks that are entitled to some special consideration.
Jim, I just wanted to make mention before on the next question, because I did, you know, preface the discussion, which is real, what you're talking about, as we were talking about. But, you know, having had served in the military, and it was obviously not, I was not in combat, but there's a way in which, what Cary and others have said, when you get out of the military, many times people don't want to share that information. It's not, you're not obligated, there's not, you know, on some applications, there are some things that says, are you a veteran? Whether or not that actually means something on a piece of paper, having been an employer, it does, you don't really know, what does this mean, because I'm saying yes or no. And, you know, having served before 9/11, I always kind of like the donut hole. So if you're past Vietnam, but before 9/11, and even though there were some conflicts in between, veterans see service some ways differently than people who have served from 9/11, you know, to currently. And I think that there's a way in which, as we're thinking about it, and as we're talking about, you know, whether someone has PTSD or mental health issues and whatnot, I think some of the things that you had, folks have made mention about having that window of time. I can just say from my personal experience, all of a sudden you're out of the military and you're like, okay, what do I do now? So even though they say, and I can just say from my experience that they say, oh, there's transition, and you talk to people, and you know, they give you kind of the exit conversation. I don't even remember what that was. I'm just like, it's time to get out. You want to get away from here. You don't even want to, you know, acknowledge the fact that you were doing this. And then, you know, several years later, and you're like, okay, this is part of who I am. This is part of my life or whatnot. But, you know, there is a way in which it's done. That's why there's so much suicide. There's so much people who are out of the military who are just like, now what do I do? This has been their life, whether it's been 5 years, 10, 20, 30, that this has been their whole life, and now what? Thinking, you know, now, and where's my preference? Where is it going to be that I serve? And now, you know, there is more conversation relative to being accepting of, we want to take veterans. That was not the case when I got in the military. You're thinking, I serve my country. This was like an important thing. And people are like, yeah, and there's all these other hundreds of thousands of people who are needing work too. So I think, you know, if we're only talking about from combat to work and talking about barriers to employment, wanting to make sure that we are giving combat veterans an opportunity to be successful in the workplace, then we really need to be talking about what are we going to require the government, whether it's the feds, you know, because it's not a state government issue, to do for veterans when they get out to make them successful employees in the workplace, whether it is, I don't have PTSD, you're getting the treatment anyway. You're gonna have, you know, out processing treatment anyway, because that 90 days, or say, if you were deployed, you get unemployment, you get some kind of transition pay, because desperation, not having money, having been in combat, all of a sudden you're with your family again and haven't seen them for a long time, all of a sudden you're at work, you're like, what's going on? That there is a door open, door closed, and this is what's happening now. So I think that, you know, based on this conversation, knowing that there needs to be equity in the workplace, but knowing too, it's not the same. It's not the same someone coming from Afghanistan and 2 weeks later, Baghdad, I'm standing there like, okay, I'm back to work. It's just not the same. And so if we're really gonna have our commitment to our veterans and say we're gonna do this, it needs to be in that transition time, because after they're gone and away, it's hard to reel them back up.
To further the conversation, presumably, Hunter, there's also got to be some type of avenue or some type of, I don't want to call it a mandate, but some type of tool in the workplace as far as the managers, right? And I would like to see a proactive company, and when I say a tool, we need some type of training, and it could be government training or another facilitated training that gives the managers or any individuals in the supervisory role the necessary training so they can recognize what they're dealing with. so if they could recognize a difference between an individual who may be a rambunctious, troublemaking employee to somebody who is suffering from an issue that they may not have come forward to that they had. I don't know if that's possible, but I think that we could get to that level, or so at least find some type of legislation or something that we can help facilitate that. You
Sort of
understand? You understand?
incentive, maybe some incentive for private sector employers to have these training programs, just to make sure that their, management folks
Yeah,
are.
yeah.
I mean, someone like Keith is obviously intimately familiar with this issue and is not gonna have a problem identifying it, but then, you've got others who maybe won't recognize it. And then so you got problems in the workplace stemming really from miscommunication and misunderstanding more so than, somebody really did something awful and needs to have the book.
Well, to be honest with you, I handle, not only for my facility, I handle all the resumes most of the resumes that come in for the company that are looking for a position that's typically past orally the hourly rate, more of a supervisory position and so forth. So I can decipher and give and break it down to corporate language, what they did in military service, how it transitions over. It gets difficult, doing that. Providing the training for that is, I think, is gonna be very difficult because it's not gonna be consistent across the board. So what happens in WestRock is gonna be very different than what happens in Corning. Or what happens, because it's gonna have a different flavor, it's gonna be dependent upon who basically gets that star put on them, says, now you're the guy, now you're the one who has to go out and do training, because it's gonna be different. Because people are gonna have different passions to train, to go through and train that. So, if you're gonna do something like that, or something comes up where it has to be very well defined on what the training requirements are, if you're gonna set up that type of program, so it's consistent across companies. And there really has to be almost, I hate to say this, almost an incentive program to do that, so that's really beneficial for everybody that's involved.
Well, look what we've done with health and safety training. We can't do something like that, the same kind of thing where there's standards for health and safety training.
But who establishes the
It
standards?
happen overnight, but.
That would be my only question, is who would establish the standards? So is it a state, is it a federal, is it supposed to be, put on the company to decide what the standards are? And who enforces them?
Keith, if I might, one of the, I guess, questions that I have, and maybe somebody on the panel can help with this. We had a limited conversation at the sub-district office yesterday. I think there's certain programs that, let's say some returning vets might qualify for under FMLA, ADA, things like that. But I can think of one case I've had at least one of my facilities not all that long ago, whereby, and I think the statement made by somebody, a veteran really doesn't wanna talk about this to anybody in the world other than maybe another vet. And even though they might qualify under some of these programs, there's at least a reluctance to come forward unless they have a comfort level. And I think it's maybe the same way sometimes with the Employees Assistance Program. If they don't feel like they're gonna be involved with somebody who really understands it, quite often, that's another vet. At least to start the process that they have a lot higher comfort level with. And I don't know if it's feasible. Number one, I think this is a wonderful format to, to get some of the dialogue going. But it's almost to me like some of the ideas need to come out of a format like this. Sometimes we try to paint everything with a wide brush, and it might come down to some companies taking a leadership role with some different programs and things, and then being able to come to some others and saying, look, we've had some success here. I think, I mean, as a combat veteran, as a plant manager, don't you think that, or do you think, I guess is a better way to put it, that some locations could designate a veteran and give them at least what your experience has given you is some training to kick off maybe a couple little pilot programs, at least give the veterans somebody that they can come to initially, so that